8 minutes paper, light it bright. 8 minutes privacy, research, insight. 8 minutes paper, feel the spark. 8 minutes privacy, making its mark. 8 minutes ticking, changing game. 8 minutes privacy, rewriting the name.
Welcome to the show, everyone, and please do subscribe to our channel. Today, we're tackling something that feels, well, more complicated every day in our digital lives. Privacy. It often seems like we're just constantly sharing personal information online, posting everything. But then you look at surveys and people say they're deeply concerned about privacy. So our mission today is to sort of unpack this apparent contradiction and maybe explore a new way of thinking about privacy that helps it all make a bit more sense. So let's just jump right in. People often say they care about privacy. We hear that all the time, right? But then online, it looks like they share pretty much everything, every meal, every thought. Does this just mean privacy is, I don't know, effectively dead? Or are we just saying we care?
Yeah, it's a really common thought, but the evidence actually points pretty strongly the other way. Consumers do care. You look at studies, and an overwhelming majority, I think one found like 86% of U.S. adults surveyed are actively taking steps online. Things like clearing cookies, maybe using VPNs, locking down their social media profiles. And it's not just an online thing either. Offline, we do it instinctively, don't we? We lower our voices in public or tilt a document so the person next to us can't read it. It really points to privacy being more of a dynamic process, like boundary regulation, not just hiding things. It's more about controlling who gets access to what and when and, how.
Okay, boundary regulation, that dynamic idea, that makes a lot of sense. But it feels like our traditional ways of thinking about privacy, focused on the government listening in, or maybe super sensitive info, or just things happening in private spaces. They just don't seem to capture what's happening today, do they? How are those old ideas falling short when we look at things like, I don't know, public records suddenly being online globally, or companies like Axiom mining consumer data, or even those little RFID tags tracking stuff?
Exactly. And what's really fascinating there is that these practices, even though they're often happening in public or with public data, they still cause this real unease. So the information might not be sensitive in the old way of thinking, or the location isn't technically private. But people still feel uncomfortable. Knowing, for instance, that a company like Axiom, the huge data broker, can build these incredibly detailed profiles about you, mostly from publicly available bits and pieces, well, it feels intrusive, even if no single piece of that data was ever truly secret. The traditional frameworks often just say, look, if it's public, there's no reasonable expectation of privacy. End of story. But that conclusion just feels fundamentally wrong to a lot of people. And that's precisely where those old models break down.
Okay, so if the old definitions aren't cutting it, is there a better way, a new framework maybe, that helps us actually make sense of this digital discomfort we're feeling? What's emerging?
Well, yeah, this is where a concept called contextual integrity gets really interesting. The core idea is that privacy isn't some universal one-size-fits-all thing. It's deeply tied to the norms of specific situations, specific contexts.
Yeah.
So this means gathering information or sharing it. It has to be appropriate to that context. And it has to follow the sort of unwritten rules, the norms of distribution for that context.
Oh, okay. That clicks. I think I felt that exact thing, like when my grocery store loyalty card data somehow led to weirdly specific ads popping up elsewhere. It felt off, like a violation, even though I probably ticked some box somewhere in the fine print,
Precisely. That's a perfect example. Think about health information. Sharing details with your doctor. Totally appropriate if it's a context. But imagine your doctor sharing those same details at a dinner party. That's a massive violation, right? Even though the information itself hasn't changed one bit. So the discomfort with, say, public records suddenly being searchable by anyone, anywhere online, or your grocery store sharing your buying habits with a magazine vendor, it comes from exactly that. It breaches the expected context, the expected flow of information for that situation. It's less about the information being secret and more about its flow being inappropriate for the setting.
Contextual integrity. Okay, that framework sounds really helpful, almost like the answer we've been looking for. But then, why does it still feel so incredibly hard to actually get privacy online? If we have a better way to think about it, why is it still such a struggle? Is it just too complicated for us to manage day to day?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It really boils down to a mix of psychological factors and economic ones that make it a real uphill battle. Psychologically, well, we humans often overestimate how much control we actually have. There's a bias called illusory control. You might think your privacy settings are locked down tight, but then a default setting changes quietly in an update, and you're exposed without realizing it. Or we get caught up in herding behavior. We see everyone else on a platform sharing freely, so we think, okay, maybe it's fine. And we do it too. Plus, there's often an inherent sort of drive to share, connecting with others. And then you have the immediate gratification of benefits like, ooh, this new app is so convenient, versus the costs of lost privacy, which are often delayed, abstract, hard to grasp. Economically, companies are, frankly, very good at exploiting these tendencies. They use confusing privacy policies full of legalese. They design interfaces with dark patterns, those sneaky little design tricks that nudge you into sharing more data than you might want to. Think about pre-checked boxes or hard-to-find opt-outs. And, of course, very liberal default settings. The whole market-based notice and consent model, click here to agree, often fails. It doesn't give consumers real, meaningful control, partly because of network effects. If all your friends are on a platform, there's huge pressure to join, regardless of the privacy policy. And there's just a fundamental power imbalance between giant tech companies and individual users.
Wow, okay. So it's a lot stacked against us. What does this actually mean, then, for trying to get some privacy back in our daily digital lives? Can individuals even realistically win this fight on their own?
Well, that's a tough part. Individual actions like constantly fiddling with settings, using privacy tools like ad blockers or encrypted messaging, they're helpful, but often they're just not enough. It places a massive, frankly unreasonable burden on you, the individual, to constantly be vigilant, to understand complex systems, to keep up with changes. That's why many argue that comprehensive public policy, like the GDPR we've seen in Europe, is really necessary to set baseline protections for everyone. But even regulation isn't a magic bullet. It faces its own challenges. You can get public adaptation, where people just kind of get used to surveillance over time. It becomes normalized. And there's always the risk of regulatory capture, where the industries that are supposed to be regulated actually end up influencing the rules heavily in their own favor, kind of watering them down. But, despite all these hurdles, the human drive for privacy, for controlling our boundaries, it's remarkably resilient. You see it across cultures, across history, even under really intense surveillance states. Like, think about people under the Stasi in East Germany. They still found ways.
Whispering secrets, passing forbidden books hand to hand. And today, you see it maybe with teenagers finding new, more ephemeral apps to share things they don't want living forever on mainstream social media. They adapt. This fundamental human need, this drive for a private space, it does give us some hope, I think. Hope for finding a future that better balances privacy with all the undeniable benefits of information sharing.
So the takeaway seems to be, privacy isn't dead, not by a long shot. It's just incredibly complicated in this super interconnected world we live in now. And getting it right requires more than just individual effort. It needs a deeper understanding of context, like you said, and it probably needs bigger systemic solutions. What stands out to you listening right now about how you manage your own privacy day to day, it makes you think, doesn't it? Please subscribe if you are interested in more conversations like this, trying to cut through the noise and get to the heart of what really matters.